threat from the other side, so that lethal force was completely unnecessary. And he was.
Let me just interrupt very quickly for the viewers.
Yeah.
This lethal force used by Israel against children, who are proxies for all non-combatants,
Right.
has been very well documented by B'Tselem.
By B'Tselem and other organizations, yes.
B'Tselem has that data is put up on a website called rememberthesechildren.org.
Right.
And I recommend viewers to really look at that, because they have documented the deaths of children on both sides since the beginning of the Second Intifada.
Right.
And as of this date, I think they record there have been 124 Israeli children killed. And there have been 1,457 Palestinian children killed. And if you look at how they are killed,
oh, it's horrible.
They have the name, the age, the cause of death of every single one. So these people are no longer nameless and faceless.
Right.
And the majority of the Palestinian children have been killed by gunshot. Right. And often gunshot to the head. Right. Meaning they are being deliberately targeted by snipers.
Right. One thing I want to point out is that, because this is a very good point, that I always justified even the killing of children. And all of the Jewish people I know, and non-Jewish people who support Israel, who defend Israel, the ones who say that anytime you criticize Israel, you hate Israel, you hate Jews, or they say, you're anti-Israeli, or you're a self-hating Jew, you're anti-Semitic. These people, none of them are able to, none of them see the suffering of the Palestinians. None of them can acknowledge that Israel has done anything inappropriate in the killing of children. And that's because they do not see the children as human beings. And also, one of the strategies that I used and that I've heard even by Israeli spokespeople and other, just normal Jewish people who support Israel is, we regret the deaths of the children. They'll express their remorse, their regret, and then say, but it was necessary because Israel was only defending themselves, and the Hamas or whatever, Palestinian militants were embedded where there were children. We didn't target children, they're just collateral damage. But the remorse is phony. The remorse, the regret that they express, it's only a way of hiding from their lack of humanity. It's a way to con themselves into believing, that it was a way for me to con myself into believing that I really cared about human rights and that I cared about other people. And it wasn't true at all. It's just an excuse.
We call that shoot and cry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you also mentioned Gilad Shalit or Shalit.
Shalit, yeah.
Which the whole world knows about.
Right.
Everybody's heard about Gilad.
Yeah.
For years.
Yes.
Being one Israeli soldier who was actually captured. He wasn't kidnapped because Palestinians from Gaza can't go into Israel to kidnap anybody.
Right.
It was, and Israelis are always going into Gaza.
And by the way, he was captured the day after Israel went into Gaza, kidnapped it depends on the report, the Muammar brothers, or maybe it was a father, I mean, maybe it was an uncle and his nephew, but one of them was a Palestinian doctor. And I don't know why Israel kidnapped these people. They gave no reason as far as I can find, but Shalit was captured the day after the Muammars were taken.
Israel calls it arrest.
Yeah.
They're arresting people.
Yeah.
And while Gilad has been held by Hamas, Israel routinely arrests and imprisons Palestinians for resistance, nonviolent resistance. And Israel maintains somewhere between 8 and 10 or 12,000 Palestinians in prison at any given time. It's down to about 8,000 now. And viewers who want to explore this can go to the website addameer.info, and that's I think it's ADDAMEER, and that's the Palestinian Prisoner Support and Human Rights Organization. It's all documented there.
Right, and by the way, Israel will arrest Palestinians as young as 10 years of age and throw them in prison, whereas if it was an Israeli kid who had committed an act, horrible, even a murder, really 18 years old is the age where if you're younger than 18 and you're Israeli Jewish, you're pretty much. It's pretty much like it is in the United States. You're a juvenile delinquent, and you're treated in juvenile.
There's several hundred children at any given time among these 8 to 10,000 Palestinian
And most are
political
tortured.
prisoners. Yeah, most are tortured.
Most are tortured.
Torture is routine.
Routine.
I think after an arrest, they have something like, what, 48 hours or a week or something before they have to go before a magistrate of any
Something
kind.
like that.
And then they have what's called administrative detention,
I was just going to say.
where Palestinians can be arrested and held for 6 months without any due process whatsoever, without any court procedures.
Right.
And those 6-month intervals can be renewed.
Right.
I know a man in Portland who's in a wheelchair, having been shot in the back by the IDF after his third arrest as a teenager.
Right.
He was let out at age 19 for the third time. A week later, he was shot in the back. He's been in a wheelchair ever since. His brother was held in successive administrative detentions for 14 years.
Yeah.
Was just recently released.
Right.
So this goes unknown. And these are the kind of things, this is the reason I'm bringing it up at this point. You started reading Finkelstein,
Right.
and then you spread to other books and other books and other books.
I read from both sides of the issue. I read Dennis Ross, I read Alan Dershowitz,
Yeah.
I read Aaron David Miller,
Right.
and I spent a lot of time on the Israeli ministries websites, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Internal Security, Health, and other Israeli websites, the Information and Terrorism Center. So,
So you tried to be very fair and balanced.
Very fair, and yes, if I had only studied Israeli government websites and the writings of Israeli leaders, I would have come to the same conclusion I've come to.
Yeah.
The confessions that aren't necessarily made as confessions, but the acknowledgments of Israel's actions there are too numerous not to realize what's going on.
It's all there.
It's all there.
It's all there, and right from the mouths of the Israeli leaders themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, do you want me to continue with the awakening?
Yeah,
We never
yeah.
did.
I just said this is some of the kind of things that you learned during the awakening.
Yes, as I was reading, and then of course I studied for years after the awakening.
Right.
But so as I continued reading, there was a point where I didn't even realize all the emotions I was going through as I was reading. I know that I got angry when I started reading about the human rights abuses of Israelis, totally unnecessary human rights abuses by Israel towards Palestinians, towards innocent children.
Yeah.
I'm reading about this, and I'm reading about, so I went through anger. At first I was angry at Israel that they would treat people this way in my name as a Jew. Then I realized, I had been blind. I didn't pay any attention to this. I justified this all my life. And then I got angry at myself. And so the shock and then the anger then turned into embarrassment. I actually felt embarrassed that I had been such an advocate, an unwitting pawn of propaganda and an advocate of dehumanization.
Yeah.
And the embarrassment turned to shame, and then the shame turned to sorrow. I felt really sorry for the Palestinian people, for all that they had endured at the hands of my people. And then I just put the book down for a minute. I just wanted to take a rest. And I guess I closed my eyes. And I don't know how long my eyes are closed, but I opened my eyes, and all of a sudden, I noticed that I had all those negative emotions, it was as if they'd been washed away from me. I was like cleansed. And it felt so stark that I looked throughout my house. I looked in my room, I looked in the corners of my room, in the living room where I was, and I looked in my bookcase, trying to find the emotions. It was just a spontaneous search because it was so dramatic. Where are these emotions? Where's the anger, the shame, the embarrassment? And I couldn't find anything. And then I felt what felt like a cloth covering my eyes. And all of a sudden it started unraveling in a spiral fashion. It uncovered my left eye and it uncovered my right eye, and it felt good as it uncovered. And the world was brighter. And then I realized that the world was really a reflection of my inner states of consciousness, that I had been projecting my fear in particular, but onto the world. And because I saw the world through the lens of fear, I interpreted every action as reinforcing that fear, pretty much.
Threatening.
Yes, so the world is a psychophysical entity is what I discovered.
And I know in the book you describe it as being released from prison, like a mental prison that you've been in. Yes.
Right, we're all, yes, and I see that amongst my Jewish friends and relatives and acquaintances and non-Jewish, but in particular Jewish, because they are really prisoners to these false beliefs that deceive them and influence them into dehumanizing another people and justifying human rights abuses. So what happens is their fear causes them to character assassinate the Palestinian people, which in return creates a lot of lack of trust among the Palestinians. So while they are saying they want peace, they're creating the conditions so that conflict will always perpetuate itself. They are the purveyors of conflict in the guise of looking for or claiming they desire peace.
Right. You know, the Israeli historian Avi Shlaim has gone into a great deal of detail in describing how virtually every violation of truces and so forth has always been instigated by Israel.
Right, deliberately,
They keep the pot stirred.
Right.
And they keep provoking until they finally get a response. That response is what gets reported in the American press. Right. And it reinforces the stereotypes in the mind of the American public,
right,
which is what Israel depends upon to support it in the world community.
Right.
Yeah.
Moshe Dayan talked about that. He even described how Israel would provoke the Syrians so that they could have an excuse to attack. General Yehoshaphat Harkabi, who was the chief of military intelligence for Israel, he talked about how deceitful Israel should be. He described this as what we should do. And this is how deceitful we should be. We should pretend that we're making moderate demands on the Palestinians, we're being fair, but really we're going to portray them as monsters. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what they've done. It's really outrageous that they do that in the name of humanity, and in particular in the name of the Jewish people. And
deliberate dehumanization.
And yes, and they're conning Jewish people around the world, and especially in Israel, especially the young soldiers who kill and abuse on behalf of this ideology. They are conning all these people into sacrificing their humanity. They really are. Just imagine the young Israeli soldier who's brought up in an environment and an educational system that teaches hatred of Arabs, teaches that the Arabs are like snakes, they're like Nazis.
Grasshoppers.
Yes, I mean, there's been studies done.
Grasshoppers that should be crushed.
Right, there's been studies done by prominent Israeli educators that show that this is a common view within Israeli schools of Arabs as less than. And so imagine, these kids are being brought up with this kind of consciousness, and the consciousness that the world hates Israel. And they're living their lives without ever fulfilling themselves as human beings because they're trapped by the propaganda that they have incorporated.
They're trapped in a Manichaean duality.
A Manichaean duality is a very good way of saying it. And this trap keeps them from being fully human, and it causes conflict throughout the entire region, and really it seeps into America. It's totally embedded in American foreign policy, and it affects the entire world. It affects the lives of billions of people in the world.
And as you know, I'm a psychologist, and what this involves, the mechanism is projection.
Right.
And during the 1960s, some of the viewers may remember that Trappist monk Thomas Merton, who was very well known and very public, and he wrote a whole book called Raids on the Unspeakable. The unspeakable was an image that he tried to make the public aware of. It's what Jung called the shadow, and so forth. It's the dark side of man.
Right.
It's the monster within that we are all capable of.
I agree.
And what we try to do, try to get rid of that.
Right.
As you were talking about, the Jewish people cannot accept that in themselves.
Right.
They can't accept that humanity.
Right. And so, in fact, what I say in my book is that, of course, there are Jews who do criticize Israel. There are former Israeli politicians, high-ranking ones, who have come out and spoken out against the occupation, including 4 heads of Shin Bet, the Israeli security, the internal security agency. And what I say is that most Jewish people, they're in denial. They deny the dark side exists, and then they project the dark side out into the world.
Are you familiar with Seaver Plocker?
No.
Well, he's a deputy editor of Ynet.
I'm familiar with Ynet.
Yeah. And he wrote an interesting editorial I saw some years ago about what are called Stalin's Jews.
Right.
Okay. And he said, every little Israeli school child learns about Einstein and Freud and all the Jews who have contributed so much to the enlightenment of, the growth of mankind.
Right.
But nobody's ever heard of Gingrich